For 10 years, my office has been the driver's seat of a luxury sedan. I make my living watching the world through a windshield, and it's taught me one thing: patterns never lie. People's lives are just a series of routes, and eventually, their secrets show up in the detours. When my wife started taking detours I didn't recognize, I started watching her patterns. And on the night of her biggest corporate gala, in front of her entire world, I put those patterns on a 50-foot screen for everyone to see. Betrayal has a way of making you feel powerless, like you're a passenger in your own life's car crash. This is a story about taking the wheel back. If you've ever felt underestimated, or if you believe that sometimes the truth needs to be delivered with the cold, hard precision of a map, then you're in the right place. Do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of justice served, and buckle up. The road is about to get very, very rough. My name is Thomas, and the city is my chessboard. I see it in a way most people don't. From behind the wheel of a meticulously clean, black Lincoln Navigator, the world unfolds as a series of grids, shortcuts, and rhythms. For over a decade, I've been a professional driver. Not a taxi driver, not a rideshare gig. I handle corporate accounts, VIPs, airport transfers for executives who value silence and efficiency over small talk. My job is to be invisible, a seamless part of their high-powered lives. A ghost in a black suit. And in that invisibility, you learn to see everything. You learn that the CEO who preaches fiscal responsibility always has you stop at an off-track betting parlor on Tuesdays. You learn that the happily married politician has a standing 3 p.m. pickup every Friday from an apartment that isn't his. You learn that people's routines are their confessions. Their patterns are their autobiographies, written in tire tracks on asphalt. I don't judge. I just observe. I drive. It's a steady, honorable living. It paid for our nice suburban home, the one with the manicured lawn and the 2-car garage. One of those cars was mine. The other belonged to my wife, Claire. For 9 years, Claire was the star of my life, the bright, dazzling destination at the end of every long shift. While I navigated the quiet, ordered world of city streets, she conquered the chaotic, loud world of corporate sales. She was brilliant, sharp, ambitious, with a smile that could disarm a hostile client and a mind that could close any deal. I was endlessly proud of her. We were a team, a study in complementary forces. I was the anchor, the steady hand on the wheel, the calm presence that grounded our life. She was the engine, the driving force, the one who propelled us forward with her fire and ambition. People envied us. Our friends would say, "You two just work. You're so different but you just fit." And we did. In the early years, our differences were our strength. I'd come home, my mind quiet after a day of solitary driving, and she'd burst through the door, energized and electric, her voice filling the house with stories of her day, the difficult client, the funny coworker, the triumph of a signed contract. I was her confidant, her quiet harbor. And she was my adventure, my connection to a world outside the hermetically sealed cabin of my car. I remember one night about 4 years into our marriage. I picked her up from the airport after she'd been away for a week closing a massive deal in Chicago. She was exhausted but glowing. As we drove home, the city lights blurring past, she talked nonstop, her hands animated, her eyes shining. And then, Thomas, at the final dinner, he tried to lowball me and I just looked him in the eye and I said, she replayed the whole scene for me. I just listened, a slow smile on my face, the sound of her voice a better soundtrack than any radio station. When she finished, she sighed and leaned her head against the passenger window. God, it must be so boring listening to me talk about work all the time. I reached over and put my hand on hers. Claire, I said, my voice quiet but sure. It's my favorite part of the day. She squeezed my hand, and in the dark of the car, with the rhythmic thump-thump of the highway beneath us, I felt like the luckiest man in the world. I was married to a supernova, and I had a front row seat. But the nature of a supernova is that it eventually burns out, or collapses in on itself. And in our life, the light began to dim so slowly that at first, I didn't even notice. It wasn't a single event. It was a gradual erosion of patterns. A series of small, almost imperceptible shifts in the rhythm of our life together. It started, as it so often does, with her phone. It used to be a piece of shared technology. She'd ask me to look up directions on it, to read her a text while she was driving. It would lie on the kitchen island, face up, a benign part of our household landscape. Then it became private. It was always in her hand, or in her pocket, or on the nightstand beside her, screen down. A subtle wall erected where there was once an open gate. When I'd walk into the living room, I'd catch her quickly thumbing an app closed, the motion slick and practiced. "Everything okay?" I'd ask. "Just work," she'd say, not looking up. "This new product launch is a killer." Her work had always been demanding. The long hours, the client dinners, the team-building weekends, they were part of the package. I never questioned them before. But they started to increase in frequency. A dinner on a Tuesday became a dinner on Tuesday and Thursday. A weekend conference once a quarter became once a month. She was traveling more but telling me less. The vibrant, detailed stories of her day were replaced with clipped, generic summaries. "How was the dinner?" I'd ask when she got home. "Fine. Good networking." "Who were you with?" "Just the usual team." The details, which she used to relish sharing, were now guarded, locked away. It felt like she was living a life I was no longer invited to witness. Then her appearance began to change. She bought new clothes, dresses that were a little tighter, heels that were a little higher than what she usually wore for corporate functions. She started wearing a new perfume, a heavy, musky scent that I didn't recognize. And she took an incredible amount of care with her appearance before these work events. More care, I started to realize, than she took for our own date nights. It was a subtle, painful clue. She was performing for a different audience now. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that it was the stress of her job, that we were just in a rut, the kind of comfortable, quiet valley that long-term couples sometimes find themselves in. I didn't want to be the suspicious, jealous husband. I was the steady one, the anchor. Anchors don't get rattled by a little turbulence. So I buried my concerns. I doubled down. I tried to be a better husband. I'd make her favorite dinner, suggest we take a weekend trip, try to rekindle the easy intimacy we'd lost. She'd agree, but she was distant. Her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes. Her laughter felt brittle. When I'd touch her, she'd flinch, just for a second, before relaxing into it. It was a small, almost invisible rejection, but it felt like a physical blow every single time. The space between us in our king-sized bed began to feel like a canyon. I'd lie awake at night, listening to the sound of her breathing, feeling a profound and terrifying loneliness. The breaking point, the moment my denial finally shattered, came on a rainy Wednesday night. Claire had a business dinner with a potential new client from out of town. She'd left at 6 p.m., looking incredible in a new silk dress, a cloud of that unfamiliar perfume trailing behind her. "Don't wait up, honey," she'd said, giving me a quick, dry peck on the cheek. "This one might go late." I didn't wait up, but I couldn't sleep. I watched a movie, I cleaned the kitchen, I paced the quiet house. Midnight came and went. Then 1 a.m. Finally, just before 2 a.m., I heard her car pull into the garage. I heard her key in the lock, the soft click of the door. I stayed on the couch, pretending to be asleep. She tiptoed into the living room. I could feel her presence in the dark, could hear her quiet, shallow breaths. She stood there for a moment, probably checking to see if I was awake. Then she went upstairs. A few minutes later, I followed. I walked into our bedroom, and the smell hit me immediately. It was her perfume, yes, but it was tangled with something else. A faint, but distinct, scent of a man's cologne. A rich, spicy scent that I had never smelled before. It wasn't the kind of scent you pick up from a handshake or a brief hug in a crowded restaurant. It was the kind of scent that lingers on skin, in hair. I stood in the doorway, my heart turning to a block of ice in my chest. She was standing by her dresser, taking off her earrings, her back to me. "Hey," I said, my voice rough. "You're home." She jumped, startled. "Thomas, you scared me. I thought you were asleep." "Long dinner?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "The longest," she said, forcing a weary laugh. This client was a talker. I think I closed him. It's a huge win for the company. She was lying. The lie was so bald, so audacious, it was almost stunning. She was standing there, smelling of another man, and feeding me a story about her professional triumph. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The trust, the benefit of the doubt, the 9 years of shared history, it all turned to dust. I looked at her, at this beautiful stranger in my bedroom, and I saw the truth. It wasn't in her eyes, or in her words. It was in the pattern. The late nights, the secret phone, the new clothes, the cologne. It was a confession, written in invisible ink, and the final ingredient had just been added. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just nodded slowly. "That's great, Claire," I said, my voice hollow. "Congratulations." I turned and walked out of the room, went downstairs, and sat in the dark of the living room until the sun came up. The ghost in the black suit, the man who was paid to be invisible, had finally seen something he couldn't unsee. And the quiet observer inside me knew that this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a different kind of route. A route that would end not in forgiveness, but in consequences. The days following that night were a masterclass in silent suffering. I moved through my life like a man underwater. The familiar hum of my car's engine, usually a comfort, now sounded like a funeral dirge. The city, once a vibrant map of possibilities, now looked flat and gray. Every street corner, every traffic light seemed to mock me. I was a professional navigator, a man who prided himself on knowing every route, and yet, I was completely lost in my own life. Living with Claire became an exercise in excruciating self-control. Every morning, she would come down for coffee, dressed in her sharp corporate armor, and smile at me as if nothing had changed. "Morning, honey," she'd say, her voice cheerful. It took every ounce of my willpower not to flinch. I had to force my own smile, a grotesque imitation of the real thing. "Morning," I'd reply, my voice a stranger's. The house felt contaminated. Her laughter, once the soundtrack of our home, now grated on my nerves. Every time her phone buzzed with a text, the sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room, and I'd feel a jolt of ice water in my veins. I was living with the enemy, but I was the only one who knew a war was being waged. The powerlessness of it was a physical weight. It settled in my shoulders, in the pit of my stomach. It was a constant, dull ache that never went away. I started to lose sleep. The nights were the worst. I'd lie beside her in the dark, her body just inches from mine, and feel an unbridgeable chasm between us. I'd listen to her steady breathing and my mind would race, replaying every lie, every flimsy excuse, every condescending smile. Was she dreaming of him? Was she texting him from the bathroom in the middle of the night? The paranoia was a poison, seeping into every corner of my mind. I felt like I was going insane. I knew I needed proof. A confrontation without it would be useless. She was a master salesperson. She would sell me a version of the truth so convincing I might even start to doubt myself. She would twist my suspicions into jealousy, my pain into insecurity. She would make me the villain. I had seen her do it with clients. I couldn't let her do it to me. I needed something cold, hard, and irrefutable. I needed data. The idea came to me during a job. I was driving a logistics manager for a shipping company, and he was on his phone, tracking his fleet of trucks. "Look at this," he'd said, showing me his tablet. "I can see every truck, every route, every stop. If a driver takes an unscheduled detour, I know it instantly. Patterns, my friend. It's all about the patterns." The word hit me like a lightning bolt. Patterns. That evening, I went online. I had installed GPS trackers on company vehicles before, at the request of clients. They were small, discreet, and terrifyingly effective. It was a line I never thought I would cross in my personal life. It felt like a profound violation, a surrender to the very suspicion I hated. For 2 days I wrestled with it. The old me, the trusting husband, screamed that it was wrong. But the new me, the man who had smelled another man's cologne on his wife, whispered that the violation had already occurred. I wasn't creating a breach of trust, I was just documenting one that already existed. With a heart as heavy as lead, I ordered one. It arrived 2 days later in a small, anonymous brown box. It was tiny, black, and magnetic. It felt cold and heavy in my hand, a dense little nugget of betrayal. That night, I waited until Claire was sound asleep. Her breathing was deep and even. I slipped out of bed, my movements as silent as a cat's. I crept down to the garage, the concrete floor cold beneath my bare feet. The air was cool and smelled of gasoline and old tires. I stood there for a long moment, just looking at her car, a sleek, silver SUV that I had helped her pick out. It was another prop in the play of our perfect life. My hands were shaking as I found a spot, a flat piece of metal deep under the chassis, hidden from view. With a soft, sickening thunk, the magnet attached itself to the frame. The sound was deafening in the silence of the garage. I felt a wave of nausea. I had done it. I had bugged my own wife's car. I felt like a criminal, a spy in my own home. But as I stood up and wiped my hands on my pants, another feeling began to surface through the shame, a sliver of control. For the first time in months, I wasn't just a passive victim. I was an active observer. Back in my study, I downloaded the app and synced it to the device. A map of our neighborhood appeared on my phone screen. And there, sitting in our garage, was a single, pulsing blue. Claire. The next day was agony. I watched the dot as it moved from our house to her office. It stayed there all morning. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'm just crazy. I tried to work, but I couldn't focus. My phone was a live grenade on the passenger seat next to me. Then, at 5:37 p.m., the dot started to move again. Her stated plan for the evening was a networking event at a hotel downtown. I watched as her car left the office parking lot. It headed toward the highway, the correct route for downtown. But then, it didn't get on the highway. It kept going, heading west, away from the city center. My breath caught in my throat. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my own car so tightly my knuckles were white. I was parked, waiting for a client, but the world outside my windshield had disappeared. My entire universe was now the map on my phone. The blue dot continued west for another 10 miles, then turned off the main road and began to snake through a quiet, tree-lined residential neighborhood. It slowed, and then it stopped. It pulsed steadily in front of a house on a street called Oak Ridge Lane. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. It could be anything, I told myself. A friend's house. A client who works from home. The excuses felt thin, pathetic. I had to know. I canceled my next pickup, my voice strained and unnatural over the phone. I started my car and I drove. I didn't speed. I drove with the calm, steady precision I was known for. But inside, a hurricane was raging. When I got to Oak Ridge Lane, I turned off my headlights and coasted down the street. It was a nice neighborhood. Big houses, manicured lawns. The kind of place where families were built. And then I saw it. Her silver SUV. Parked in the driveway of a 2-story brick colonial. There was another car in the driveway, a dark blue BMW. A car I recognized. It belonged to David Foster, a senior manager from her department. The man she'd once described as a work friend, almost like a brother. The man who was married with 2 kids. The lights were on inside the house. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. I parked at the end of the street, in the shadows, and I just watched. I watched the house where my wife was with another man. I watched as the minutes ticked by, turning into an hour, then 2. The blue dot on my phone didn't move. It just pulsed, a steady, digital heartbeat mocking the absolute destruction of mine. I don't know how long I sat there. The world outside was dark and quiet. Inside my car, it was the end of the world. The cold, hard data on my phone had merged with the cold, hard reality in front of my eyes. This was not a suspicion. This was not a paranoid delusion. This was a fact. A pattern. The truth. The grief was overwhelming. It was a physical force, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. The 9 years of our life together played through my mind like a sped-up film, and it all ended here, on this dark, anonymous street, staring at a stranger's house. But as the hours wore on, something else began to bubble up through the grief. A cold, hard anger. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of her lies. The disrespect. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had made a fool of me. She had used my trust, my stability, my love as a camouflage for her secret life. She thought I was just the simple, dependable driver. The man who saw the world in straight lines, too oblivious to notice her curves. I looked at the blue dot on my phone one last time. It was no longer a source of pain. It was a weapon. She had created this pattern. She had written this story. I was just the man who was going to find the right way to publish it. My grief was hardening into resolve. The driver, the observer, the ghost in the machine, he was done watching. It was time to take the wheel. The drive home from Oak Ridge Lane was a journey through a new landscape. The fog of grief and confusion had been burned away by the white-hot certainty of the truth. I was no longer a man lost at sea. I was a man with a map, a destination, and a full tank of gas. The destination wasn't reconciliation. It was retribution. When I walked back into our house, it was well after midnight. Claire was still not home. The house was silent, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like a stage, waiting for the final act. I went into my study, closed the door, and sat down at my computer. The pulsing blue dot was still at David's house. I took a screenshot. I saved it in a new folder on my desktop. The folder was labeled, simply, Patterns. My mindset shifted. The pain was still there, a low, constant hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer the driving force. Now, the driver was a cold, methodical clarity. I was a professional. My job was to plan routes, to anticipate traffic, to execute a journey flawlessly from point A to point B. This would be no different. This would be my final, most important delivery. The days that followed, I became a ghost of a different kind. At home, I was a phantom, moving through the rooms with a detached calm that was so complete it actually seemed to put Claire at ease. My lack of questioning, my placid acceptance of her excuses, she mistook it for ignorance. For trust. It was the perfect cover. She was so confident in her deception that she couldn't see the abyss opening up beneath her feet. "I'm so sorry I was late the other night," she said one morning, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "The event at the hotel ran so long, and then a few of us went for a drink after to decompress. You know how it is." I looked up from my newspaper, met her eyes, and gave her a small, serene smile. "Don't worry about it," I said. "As long as you're working hard." The look of relief that washed over her face was almost comical. She thought she was getting away with it. She had no idea I was archiving her every move. Every evening she was, at a client dinner, I took a screenshot of her car parked at David's house. Every weekend conference, where she claimed to be in a hotel 2 hours away, I logged the data of her car never leaving the 10-mile radius of his suburban neighborhood. The Patterns folder on my computer grew, day by day, into an undeniable, time-stamped diary of her affair. The perfect venue for the delivery presented itself about a month later. It came in the mail, a thick, cream-colored envelope with an embossed logo. It was an invitation to the annual Sterling Group Corporate Gala, her company's biggest night of the year. It was a black tie event held in the grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel downtown. Awards, speeches, a champagne fountain, the whole performance. Claire was ecstatic. "Thomas, you have to come," she said, waving the invitation. "It's going to be a huge night. My team is up for a big award. I need my handsome husband by my side for luck." She wanted me there as a prop. The steady, dependable husband. The final piece of her perfect public image. The irony was so rich, so potent, it was almost poetic. She was handing me the stage, the audience, and the spotlight. "Of course," I said, my voice smooth as silk. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The plan began to form in my mind, not as a messy outburst of anger, but as a clean, elegant logistical problem to be solved. The objective: to display the contents of the Patterns folder on the main projection screens during the gala's keynote presentation. I started my reconnaissance immediately. The next day, I arranged to have a meeting with a fictional client at the very hotel where the gala was being held. While I waited in the lobby, I saw a team setting up for a conference in the grand ballroom. I walked in, all polite curiosity. Wow, quite a setup, I said to a young A/V technician who was taping down cables. What kind of projector do you guys use for a room this size? He was young, eager to show off his expertise. He told me everything. The type of high-lumen projector, the number of screens, the location of the control booth at the back of the room. He pointed it out, a small, raised platform partially hidden by a black curtain. He explained that all the presentations were run from a central laptop, connected via an HDMI switchbox. An HDMI switchbox. It was perfect. All I needed was my own laptop and a few seconds of access to that box. The next step was building the presentation itself. This became my secret, late-night project. I wasn't a graphic designer, but I was a meticulous planner. I bought a mapping software that allowed me to animate routes. I imported all the GPS data I had collected. For weeks, I sat in my study, the only light coming from the glow of the monitor, and I built my masterpiece. I started with a clean map of the city. Then I began to layer the data. I coded Claire's routes in a bright, unmistakable red. The first animation showed her route from her office to David's house on that first night I tracked her. The red line snaked across the map, and a simple, clean text box appeared. Wednesday, October 11th. Stated destination, the Westin Grand Hotel. Actual destination, 14 Oak Ridge Lane. I did this for every single instance. Over a dozen routes, each one a glowing red slash of betrayal. I created a rhythm to it. A new route would trace itself across the screen every 10 seconds, each one exposing a new lie. After showing the individual trips, the grand finale was a time-lapse. I animated all the routes at once, dozens of red lines scribbling back and forth, between her office and his house, over and over, until the map was a chaotic web of deceit, all centered on one damning address. The final image was a zoom-in on that house, with the dates and times of every visit listed like credits at the end of a movie. I rehearsed my own part of the plan endlessly. I needed a reason to be near the A/V booth at the right time. The keynote speech was scheduled for 9:30 p.m., right after the awards. I would need a distraction. Something plausible. The night before the gala, I stood in my garage and looked at the silver SUV. The tiny tracker, my silent co-conspirator, was still there, faithfully doing its job. A wave of sadness washed over me. This was the car we'd bought together. We'd taken road trips in it. We'd brought groceries home in it. It had been a part of our life. Now it was Exhibit A. Claire came into the garage, holding the dress she was going to wear. It was a stunning, backless, emerald green gown. She looked beautiful and happy. "What do you think?" she asked, holding it up against herself. "Too much." "No," I said, my voice quiet. "It's perfect. You'll be the star of the show." She smiled, a brilliant, confident smile. "That's the plan," she said. I just nodded. She had her plan. And I had mine. The routes had been mapped. The delivery was scheduled. All I had to do now was drive. The night of the gala was a symphony of fakery, and I was its lead conductor. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the knot on my black tie. My reflection was a stranger, a calm, composed man in a perfectly tailored suit. My hands were steady. My expression was neutral. But beneath the surface, my heart was a frantic, wild thing, beating a rhythm of anticipation and dread. This was it. There was no turning back. Claire was a vision in her emerald dress. She floated around our bedroom, a whirlwind of perfume and excitement, completely oblivious. "How do I look?" she asked, spinning in front of me. "Like you own the world," I said. And in that moment she believed she did. The drive to the hotel was surreal. She chattered excitedly about the award, about which executives she needed to speak to, about the speech her boss was going to give. I just drove, my hands at 10 and 2, my eyes on the road. I was the dependable husband, playing my part to perfection one last time. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and glittering gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, buzzing hum of corporate ambition. Champagne flowed. People laughed too loudly. It was Claire's natural habitat. She thrived in this environment, moving through the crowd with an easy, practiced grace, her hand resting possessively on my arm. She introduced me to her colleagues, to her boss, to a few senior VPs. "This is my husband, Thomas," she would say, her voice filled with pride. "My rock." Every introduction was another twist of the knife. I would smile, shake their hands, and say, "A pleasure to meet you. Claire speaks so highly of all of you." I saw David across the room. He was with his wife. He caught my eye and gave me a curt, almost imperceptible nod, a flicker of what looked like anxiety in his eyes before he turned away. He was nervous. He should be. We sat at a large, round table with Claire's team. The dinner was endless. I pushed food around my plate, my appetite gone. I listened to the small talk, the corporate jargon, the sycophantic laughter. It all felt like it was happening a million miles away. My focus was on the back of the room, on the small, curtained-off A/V booth where the young technician from my reconnaissance trip was hunched over a laptop. Finally, the awards ceremony began. Claire's team won. She went up on stage with them, her face flushed with victory, and accepted the heavy glass trophy. She blew me a kiss from the stage. The entire room applauded her success, her brilliance. They were applauding a lie. After the awards, her boss, a portly man named Mr. Sterling, took the stage for the keynote address. This was my cue. As the lights dimmed and a PowerPoint slide with the company logo appeared on the 3 massive screens flanking the stage, I leaned over to Claire. "My stomach's a little off," I whispered. "I'm just going to step out for some air." "Oh, okay, honey." "Feel better," she whispered back, her attention already glued to the stage. I stood up and made my way toward the back of the ballroom, my movements casual, unhurried. As I approached the A/V booth, I took the small, concealed flask of water from my jacket pocket. My laptop, a slim silver model identical to the one the tech was using, was in a thin briefcase in my other hand. I stumbled, just as I'd rehearsed in my mind 100 times, right next to the technician's small table. "Whoa, sorry," I exclaimed, as the water, accidentally, sloshed from my flask onto a stack of his papers and perilously close to his keyboard. "Hey, watch it," he yelped, jumping up to salvage his notes. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," I said, my voice a symphony of panicked apology. "Let me help you clean that up." As he frantically blotted the papers, his back was turned to the switch box for a crucial 5 seconds. That was all I needed. My hands moved with practice speed. I unplugged his HDMI cable. I plugged in the one connected to my own laptop, which I had already opened and queued up inside my briefcase. I placed the briefcase on the floor, angled so the screen was hidden but the port was accessible. It was done. "No harm done," he said, finally satisfied his equipment was safe. "Just be more careful." "Absolutely." "So sorry again," I said, and then I melted back into the shadows at the edge of the room, my heart threatening to beat its way out of my chest. On stage, Mr. Sterling was droning on. "And as we look forward to the next fiscal quarter, our projections are stronger than ever." The slide on the screen behind him was supposed to change to a bar graph of quarterly earnings. But it didn't. Instead, the screen flickered. The corporate logo vanished. It was replaced by a clean, satellite map of our city. A few confused murmurs rippled through the audience. People thought it was a technical glitch. Mr. Sterling, seeing the wrong image behind him, faltered. One moment, folks." But then the animation began. A single, glowing red line started to draw itself across the map, starting from the downtown office building where we all sat. It snaked its way west, ending in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. A text box appeared. "Wednesday, October 11th. Stated destination, the Westin Grand Hotel. Actual destination, 14 Oak Ridge Lane." The murmuring in the room grew louder. People were pointing, whispering. I found Claire in the crowd. She was staring at the screen, a puzzled frown on her face. Then the next animation began. Another red line. Another date. The same destination. Thursday, October 19th. Stated destination, client dinner at Morton's Steakhouse. Actual destination, 14 Oak Ridge Lane. I saw the exact moment the blood drained from Claire's face. I saw her hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning, catastrophic horror. Her head whipped around, her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for, what? An explanation? An escape? Her gaze swept right past me, a ghost in the shadows. On the screen, the routes kept coming, faster and faster. A lie for every occasion. The time-lapse began, the map becoming a frantic spiderweb of red lines, all leading to the same place. The room had fallen completely, deathly silent. You could hear a pin drop. Every eye was glued to the screens, watching the digital diary of my wife's affair play out in high definition. I saw David. He had shrunk down in his chair, his face ashen, his wife staring at him with a look of pure, dawning devastation. The animation reached its crescendo, zooming in on the final address, the list of dates and times scrolling slowly up the screen like a memorial to a death. The death of my marriage. Mr. Sterling stood on stage, speechless, his mouth agape. The silence in the room was a living thing. It was thick with shock, with scandal, with pity. In that moment, I stepped out from the shadows and walked calmly to my table. I didn't look at the screens. I looked at Claire. Her face was a mask of utter ruin. The confident, brilliant superstar was gone, replaced by a broken, trapped animal. Her eyes, wide and pleading, finally found mine. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. I leaned down, my voice no more than a whisper, for her ears only. "Patterns never lie," I said. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked, with a steady, even stride, right through the silent, parted crowd. I didn't look back. I walked out of the ballroom, through the opulent lobby, and out into the cool, clean night air. I never saw Claire again. I heard through the grapevine what happened. She and David were fired the next day. His wife left him. Claire's career, the thing she had sacrificed everything for, was in ashes. Our divorce was swift and uncontested. She didn't fight for the house, for the money, for anything. There was nothing left to fight for. She had been so thoroughly, so publicly exposed, there were no more moves to make. My revenge wasn't loud. There was no screaming, no confrontation. It was quiet, cold, and precise. A delivery of information. I simply took the private lies she had been telling and made them public knowledge. I used her own patterns, her own choices, as the weapon of her destruction. I gave her the ending she had written for herself. I'm still a driver. My office is still the front seat of a Lincoln. The city still unfolds before me as a series of routes and patterns. But something is different. The weight is gone. The dull, constant ache of betrayal has been replaced by a quiet, calm emptiness. It's not happiness, not yet. But it's peace. Sometimes, on a long, quiet drive late at night, I think about that night in the ballroom. I don't feel triumph. I don't feel joy. I just feel a sense of balance. Of a story that has reached its correct and final destination. I held up a mirror, and the world finally saw her for who she really was. My job was done. And I just keep driving. The truth, sometimes, isn't a conversation. It's a destination. And as you've just heard, the route to get there can be a long and lonely one. What do you think? Was the revenge too harsh, or a perfectly fitting end to a story of deceit? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have a story about justice being served, I want to hear it. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that prove, in the end, everything comes full circle.